On the black granite strand of Hardhome, the sea keened like a mother robbed of all her children. Salt spray mingled with a powdering of new snow, the mingled flakes drifting sideways in a wind that smelled of brine and cold ash. Moonlight pierced ragged cloud to silver the ruin. Overturned longboats, splintered piers, gulls circling a banquet of the dead. But the corpses did not lie still. One after another, they twitched, spasmed, rose, eyes filmed white, limbs jerking as if yanked by invisible strings. Shattered hips mended themselves with a crackle of frost. Throats ripped open by axes knitted shut beneath a glaze of blue ice. Far above, upon a bluff crowned by a burnt-out meeting house, the Night King watched in silence, pale flame dancing within pupils blacker than the void between stars. His hand lifted. Thousands answered, shuffling toward the half-submerged hulks, waiting at anchor like patient beasts of burden. Fires guttered along the foreshore, reduced to dull orange lumps veiled in gray smoke. In their warmth cowered the last living stragglers, those who had not made Jon Snow's desperate retreat. Mothers murmured prayers through cracked lips. Children whimpered against frozen breasts. A gray beard wrapped an infant in sealskin, hoping vainly that tiny heartbeats might slip unnoticed beneath a dead tide. But the wind shifted. The torches paled into sickly coals as a rolling hush swept the beach. It sounded almost like distant surf, yet every soul sensed the lie. It was the cadence of 10,000 pairs of bare feet padding over snow, and a chorus of lifeless lungs inhaling for the first time since they froze. The returning white spared no glance for kindling or for moon, only for the Night King's raised arm. When it fell like the stroke of a headsman's blade, they surged. Screams spiked, short and sharp as gull cries. Steel flashed, bone yielded. New servants were born with each red splash upon the snow. The Night King drifted down a staircase of ice that formed beneath his boots, the air hardening step by step until his soles touched the sand. His lieutenants, thin, tall, and crowned with spurs of crystal and horn, fanned outward to inspect the harvest. They spoke no words. A glance sufficed to direct 36 to drag shattered hulls nearer the tide line, where ice coated the waves so thickly that a man might walk atop. The living would have marveled. The dead obeyed. Along the waterline, the sea froze in scalloped crescents, shaping natural slipways. Whites hauled timbers and lashed masts with rope braided from their own hair. Those whose spines had snapped were tossed into the surf to stiffen into ballast. By dawn, the razed town stood empty. Every hut leveled, every post ripped free. Wood that once warmed children's bellies through long northern nights now formed keels and ribs beneath the Night King's gaze. He needed no smith to bend iron nails. His touch coaxed tendrils of ice through plank and beam, sealing joints stronger than any copper rivet. The hulls gleamed, pale and cold, born of everything Hardhome had been and all it had lost. Far beyond, in the ragged light of pre-dawn, a single crow cut across the sky, feathers bright against the bleakness. Ghosts of warmth still clung to its wings, remnants of a hearth in Castle Black, where brothers of the Night's Watch dozed upright over bowls of thin stew. South of the wall, all was quiet, but above that massive rampart, on a parapet dusted with wind-blown snow, Jon Snow himself leaned against a crenelle, haunted eyes fixed northward, though darkness rendered the horizon featureless. The memory of those glowing blue pupils felt burned upon his eyelids. Each time he blinked, he saw the Night King's smileless face as clearly as if it floated a foot before him. He had saved a handful, Tormund, Carsey's children, a boatload of ragged free folk, but the cost of those left behind weighed like grayscale on his skin. Samwell Tarly climbed the stair tower, boots squeaking where hoarfrost coated each pine plank. He found Jon unmoving, breath coiling around his beard. "You should rest," Sam murmured, voice barely above the hush of the wind. Jon did not turn. "He is still there," Jon whispered. "I feel him, as if the cold itself has eyes." Sam swallowed. "The Night King can't pass the wall. The spells are woven into the very stones." Yet his own mind conjured a memory. Maester Eamon's frail hands shivering as he read the manuscripts, voice cracking with doubt. Spells fade, walls crumble, winter remembers. Sam forced a smile that never reached his eyes. Down in the yard, the free folk survivors huddled beneath borrowed furs. Tormund Giantsbane paced among them, face grim, half whispering reassurance, half barking threats to any man who thought of scaling the wall in the other direction. His enormous shadow stretched across the snow, merging with those of the brothers posted on the battlements. The two forces, men sworn to blacken men, once sworn to nothing, shared an uneasy quiet, bound together by a terror that had no use for oaths. Light bled into the eastern sky, painting the ice rampart in shades of bruised lavender. Morning offered no comfort, it merely revealed how truly few they were. Back at Hardhome, the Night King's fleet took shape. Sails of stitched hides bellied beneath winds born of his breath alone, swirling with frost. He walked between the prows, fingertips brushing figureheads carved from splintered doors. Where his nails traced, hoarfrost bloomed into snarling wolves, roaring lions, krakens curling across pine. Mockery of the sigils of southern houses who still bickered over thrones they believed to matter. He felt none of the rivalry they cherished. He was older than pride, older than fear. Only the memory of betrayal quickened the ice inside him. Men had driven his kind north with fire and Valyrian steel, forgetting that ice is patient. He would remind them. Children of the forest once whispered that every tree has two faces, one that drinks sunlight, another that drinks the dark. The Night King recalled the taste of sap on his tongue when their obsidian blade pierced his heart long ago beneath the weirwood's bleeding eyes. That moment echoed through him now as he reached the last vessel, its keel half buried in crystallizing surf. He laid a palm upon the mast. Frost spider webbed upward, hardening the canvas so solid it rang when struck. A hornless lieutenant approached, offering the broken haft of a wildling spear. The Night King accepted. With a twist of his wrist, the wood blackened, hollowed, shaped into an instrument of command. He lifted the horn to his lips and blew. No sound breached mortal hearing, but across the shore, every revenant froze mid-task, heads snapping toward him like puppets. He gestured seaward. Obediently, the fleet began to slide across the ice-sheathed tide, drawn by ropes of sinew, pushed by countless drowned wights, wading waist-deep through slush. It was not merely dead men he shepherded. Beneath the ice, shapes stirred, pale forms with webbed fingers and shark-like teeth. The drowned memories of sailors taken by winter storms. They answered his call in silence, gliding beneath the hulls like shadows upon moonlit meadows. Above, white wolves padded across floating hunks of pack ice, breath rising in plumes. Their eyes glowed the same glacial blue. He had stolen the flower of Hardhome's life and planted a new garden, one that would bloom only frost. Now he would carry it south, across the shivering sea that men called the Bay of Seals, toward Eastwatch by Thesey and the wall beyond. Dusk found Jon Snow still walking the parapets, unable to purge the image of that beach from his mind. Many of the brothers had retired to warm themselves in the vaulted tunnels, but he stayed, listening for something he could not name. Ghost padded at his heel, tail low, hackles bristling though nothing moved in the darkness. The dire wolf's nostrils flared as he sniffed the frigid breeze. Jon laid a gloved hand on the white fur. "You smell them too," he murmured. Somewhere far below, the old bear's ravens cawed restlessly in their roosts. The entire wall seemed to hold its breath. In King's Landing the nights grew cooler, but autumn still granted soft winds off the Blackwater Rush. Queen Regent Cersei Lannister stood upon a balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, wine cup in hand, gazing at the purple blaze of another sunset. The bay flickered with torchlight as small folk loaded grain ships bound for Old Town and the Arbor, reparations owed after too many seasons of war. She scarcely noticed. Her thoughts lingered on whispers from the north. Jon Snow declared Lord Commander. Stannis Baratheon's march stalled by snow, the wildling threats subdued. Convenient tales. She doubted any of it mattered. The true war lay within the capital's walls, the one fought with masks and parchment. Yet as a breeze lifted the lion's sigil banner above her, her skin pebbled. She pulled her cloak tighter though the air was gentle. Unseen, a shadow fell across the moon's disk. A passing raven winging south, black against silver. It croaked once, its cry carrying farther than seemed possible, and the hairs on her arms rose. Far inland on a lonely stretch of the King's Road south of the Neck, Arya Stark, now going by the name Cat of the Canals in her own head, though she had never reached Bravos, slept beneath a tangle of willow roots. Her dreams were thick with snow. She heard a horn blowing in a place without walls, saw a boy with sad eyes standing on a frozen bridge, saw her father's face shatter like glass when touched by cold lips. She woke gasping, dagger clenched in her fist. The night hummed, insects quiet, as if afraid. Somewhere to the north, beyond horizon after horizon, terror was taking shape, and she felt its tremor like distant thunder in her bones. In Old Down's library tower, Archmaester Marwyn thumbed a brittle scroll older than Aegon's conquest, its glyphs etched by children of men yet unborn. Candlelight danced on the silver mask at his throat. He muttered, translating half-remembered runes that spoke of ice dragons that swam the shadow sea, of frozen reefs and shores of silent song. He frowned, quill scratching notes into the margins. A novice interrupted, breathless with news of a night raven arriving from Aemon Targaryen on the wall. Though the ink was smudged, the parchment damp, as if the bird had flown through storm upon storm. Marwyn dismissed the boy. He had read Aemon's warnings before, always the same. The darkness rises. Light your fires. But Marwyn now suspected that the old maester's fears underestimated the scale. The scroll beneath his hands described not a horde, but a tide. Back at Castle Black, Dolorous Ed helped hoist barrels of lamp oil to the top of the wall. I always dreamed I'd die with my boots on, he muttered. Didn't think I'd freeze to the wall first. Beside him, a silent giant of a free folk woman. Magnar of Then's widow lifted 2 barrels at once as if they were stools. She said nothing, but her stare dared the night to come for her. They stacked the oil behind Merlin's, working by torchlight, breath pluming like forged smoke. Every man felt the weight of centuries as they trod the rampart's ancient stones, each brick laid by hands long dust. Sam joined Jon once more near midnight, clutching a weathered tome. I found something in the annals of Lord Commander Runsel Hightower, he said, voice shaking. During the long night, before the wall was built, there's mention of creatures that rode not just horses, but corpses of whales and seals, frozen together into rafts. Jon turned, brows knitting. You think he'll try the sea? Sam nodded miserably. If the dead feel neither hunger nor fatigue, what's to stop them? Jon gazed eastward, where the wall met the Black Sea at Eastwatch. Tormund says there are caves beneath the castle, tunnels carved by smuggling tides. If the ice holds, he could bypass the gates entirely. Sam shivered despite his furs. Aemon always said the wall's magic is strongest where it is tallest. It might be weaker where it meets the water. In Eastwatch Bay Tezi, Cotter Pike stood atop the sea tower, spyglass pressed to his one good eye. He saw nothing but churning gray, yet he tasted something metallic on the back of his tongue, as though lightning had struck miles away. Storm's coming, he growled to no one. A gull swooped low, screeching. It veered off abruptly as if slapped by an unseen hand, and vanished into mist. Days passed. The undead fleet advanced beneath leaden skies, its progression marked only by sudden silences across the far north. Villages that answered no ravens, watchposts that returned no horn blasts. Whalers at Skagaskar glimpsed sails like ragged wings, fled south before dawn, and washed ashore 3 days later, pale as moonlight and smiling through broken jaws. Whispers traveled faster than ravens. At Winterfell, Davos Seaworth, now counselor to the newly crowned King Stannis, spread charred maps before a dwindling hearth. We must ride for Castle Black immediately, he urged. Stannis frowned, fingers drumming the hilt of Lightbringer. But neither man could deny the panic creeping among their ranks. Scouts, sent north, failed to return. Melisandre stared long into her flames and said only, "The cold that walks will soon drink the warmth of kings." Even the Baron of Light seemed dimmer that night. Aboard the largest of the Night King's vessels, built from the shattered bones of Hardhome's great hall. The Night King stood upon a deck, glazed in ice. Stars glittered above, unblinking witnesses. No crew moved at rigging or helm. The ship sailed where he willed, carried by winds summoned from the abyss. In his mind he felt each dead thing like a candle flame inverted, points of darkness that fed on the world's warmth. He reached out across the water, urging them forward, promising oblivion beyond all pain. Beneath the waves, drowned husks pulled on anchor chains, guiding the fleet through narrow channels of black water between cakes of drift ice. Slowly, inevitably, the wall grew upon the horizon. A jagged strip of white, lit faintly by green curtains of aurora dancing in the polar sky. At Castle Black, horn blasts shattered the pre-dawn hush. 1 for watch, 2 for wildlings, 3 for others. The last had not sounded in living memory. Its mournful echo swirled down spiral stairs, rattling braziers. Men spilled from bunks half-armored, fumbling helms onto heads, hands shaking as they grabbed torches. John raced along the king's tower corridor, ghost bounding ahead. Outside, the air seemed to burn against his skin. Snowflakes fluttered upward, as if drawn toward the sky instead of earth. Overhead, ravens erupted in ragged flight, cawing frantically before wheeling south. The deerwolf halted at a slit window overlooking the sea. John pressed beside him. By lantern light, he saw the horizon cut by masts, dozens, perhaps hundreds, each crowned with a sail that rippled not in wind, but in something colder, stiffer, as if the very air cracked around them. Cotter Pike's voice thundered from Eastwatch's ramparts, carried by the wind. "To arms, man the scorpions! Light the hellfire!" John's chest tightened. He remembered the giant scorpions Coburn had boasted of in King's Landing. But the watch possessed only rusty torsion bows, fit for harassing raiders. Lamp oil, not wildfire, filled their barrels. Yet they had no choice. He tore down a cramped corridor, barked orders at half-asleep stewards, rallied archers to line the ice cliff stairs. Above all, he prayed that the wall's ancient spells would hold. But as the first rays of dawn limned the rampart, a distant crack echoed along the frozen bay, a sound like a door splintering under an iron boot. Then, another. Ice sheared from the wall's base where it met the water, great slabs calving into the sea. Through his spyglass, John watched them bob, then freeze in place, forming a jagged path of stepping stones. Upon each newly rooted platform, skeletons clambered, forming a bridge toward Eastwatch's gate. Pike signaled a volley. Flaming arrows arced downward, hissing steam when they struck ice. Some sank into decayed flesh, igniting momentary flickers that died as quickly as they flared. The dead did not scream. They climbed, climbed, climbed. Somewhere below, a horn blowed again. 3 shocks, then cut off mid-note. John's heart lurched. "Raise the portcullis," he ordered, voice hoarse. "Let every able-bodied man within the castle fall back to the central yard. We hold them at choke points." But the chaos was already blooming. Free folk jammed stairwells, brothers shoved to reach boiling oil cauldrons. Tormund's roar rose above the din as he swung a 2-handed greatsword, herding stragglers toward makeshift barricades. Hours later, though it felt like centuries, the undead tide beat against Eastwatch's outer wall. Sections built of timber groaned as ice bloomed across beams, swelling the wood until nails screamed loose. Wights clawed through gaps, hands black with rot yet strong as iron. Brothers thrust spears, axes chopped, arrows rattled. For every corpse that fell, 3 more vaulted over its twitching mass. Snow turned to slush, slush to mud, mud to crimson slurry beneath stamping boots. When the sun at last broke through slate clouds, its feeble light revealed an ocean black with ships. A total eclipse of wood and hide, and a second assault underway. Pale figures with swords of frozen fire leapt from decks to the ice path, carving through any barricade of wood or steel. They moved with frightening grace, blades trailing vapor. Where those blades struck steel, shards exploded. Where they grazed flesh, skin glazed, cracked, and fell away like shards of porcelain. John fought upon the rampart of Eastwatch's inner tower. Longclaw's Valyrian steel sang in the bitter air, each parry spraying frost. A lieutenant of the others advanced, helm crowned in spires, sword narrow as moonlight. Jon met him, sparks like blue embers scattering. The cold bit deeper than any wound, turning each breath to razors in his throat. Yet for one heartbeat he saw, in the other's pulsing eyes, something akin to sorrow, an age-old grief buried beneath ice. Then the moment passed, and their blades clashed with a sound that split the wind. Below, Ghost tore into a pack of skeletal hounds, white fur streaked scarlet. Somewhere behind, Sam shouted for Jon to fall back. Maester Aemon lay collapsed beside a brazier, lungs rattling. The wall shivered. High above, scenes of blue light crackled like lightning trapped in glass, racing along the length of the ice. Jon felt the tremor beneath his boots. A crack shot through the parapet stone. The ancient sorcery woven by Brandon the Builder himself flared, struggling against a force older than men's recollection. With a thunderous detonation, a slab of the wall's easternmost face sheared free, avalanching into the sea. Water geysered, steam hissed, and arrows of ice blasted skyward, impaling friend and foe alike. Silence followed. A silence so absolute it seemed to devour thought. In that hush, the Night King stepped onto the broken ice apron, no longer content to direct from afar. A gust of wind parted the fog to reveal him, tall as a northern pine, armor of interlocked crystal plates gleaming with trapped starlight. His sword glimmered frost blue. Around him the dead bowed, even those still aflame from lantern oil flinging themselves into the snow to smother unnecessary heat. He gazed up the cascade of rubble toward Jon. Their eyes met across a gulf of crashing waves and drifting embers, icy blue upon gray. Without hurry, the Night King raised one mailed hand. Behind him the sea responded, heaving up grappling sheets of ice. Upon those rising slabs stepped ranks of the drowned, sailors, fishermen, children, water streaming from their mouths like liquid night. They marched toward the breach. Jon staggered back as the realization struck him. The wall's power at the shore was failing. If Eastwatch fell, the world behind reached all the way to the summer sea. At Winterfell, a raven landed on the broken soldier tree, screeching loud enough to rouse even faint-hearted squires. Sansa Stark broke the seal with trembling fingers, reading words that seemed carved in ice. Eastwatch besieged. Wall compromised. Night falls forever. She closed her eyes against the fear coursing through her spine. Outside the Godswood, snow began to fall, though the sky was clear, each flake landing warmer than the air itself, as if some distant furnace were drawing all heat away. Deep within the crypts below, Bran Stark sat upon a carved tea throne he'd fashioned from weirwood limbs. His eyes were white, spirit soaring far above the world on the backs of ravens. He saw the breach at Eastwatch, the Night King's glacial aurora swirling above, and felt a pull inside his chest. A cord of time stretched taut. If it snapped, everything would drown in winter. Yet motion itself felt heavy in his dreams. He reached, and the ravens scattered like ash in wind, buffeted by a shockwave of cold that made the sky itself groan. Back at Eastwatch, Jon clutched at the stone stairs rail as it began to sag toward the sea, foundations eroded by frost. He yelled for retreat, voice swallowed by gale. Men scrambled toward Castle Black along the ice road, even as holes opened beneath their feet. Torment hoisted a screaming child onto his shoulders, sprinting across cracking plates. Sam half-dragged Maester Aemon, tears freezing on his cheeks. Above them all, the Night King watched with expressionless patience. He knew the wall was older than pride, but not older than winter. And winter had always, in its slow, relentless way, devoured every wall ever raised by man. Night fell early that day. Darkness rolled across the shattered coast, moonlight strangled by storm clouds that boiled outward from the breach. Within that darkness, eerie lights flickered, cold blues and ghostly greens, dancing along the horizon like a dawn that had forgotten its color. Jon, half carried by Adid, and a silent then, stumbled onto solid rampart near Castle Black. Bell towers rang, desperate clangor echoing down the tunnels. Wolves howled inland, a chorus that answered the Night King's silent horn. Somewhere deep in the forest, the last of summer's crickets fell silent. John had no breath to spare, but he forced words. Light every beacon from here to Moat Cailin. We run south. Warn Winterfell, White Harbor, King's Landing. If the realm will not unite now, it never will. Ed nodded, eyes wide. Ghost pressed against John's leg, whining low. Far behind, Eastwatch kept burning, orange against black, while the undead climbed over its walls, a tide that neither flame nor steel could stem. Overhead the wall shuddered again, a groaning leviathan awakened. Snow stung John's eyes. Or perhaps it was salt. He tasted both on his lips. Not yet, he told himself as he limped toward the main courtyard. Not while one heartbeat remains in my chest. But somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath racing thoughts of strategy and sacrifice, he acknowledged a truth. The war had already breached their strongest defense. Everything from here would be retreat. And the retreat would never end until the living stood with their backs to the sea at the world's far edge, or until they ceased to stand at all. In the quiet that followed, Jon Snow lifted his gaze toward the starless sky. High above, a curtain of pale light shimmered, bending, twisting, forming for an instant the shape of a great serpent, devouring its tail. He thought he heard laughter, distant, faint, and knew it was only the wind. Yet in that sound lay the promise of a winter no hearth could melt, no dawn could dispel. And far out on the dark waters of the shivering sea, the Night King's fleet sailed on, silent oars stroking, sails hard as bone, bearing an empire of death toward the heart of the realms of men. Ah, Kai. Snowfall thickened into a pale curtain that swallowed the horizon as Jon Snow crossed the courtyard of Castle Black. Torches guttered in sconces, sparks torn away by the gale like fireflies flung into the void. The clang of the bell still trembled in the frosted rafters, each blow reverberating down marrow and memory alike. Brothers and free folk alike streamed through the main gate in ragged columns, some dragging sledges of provisions, others hauling casks of lamp oil or dragging the injured on makeshift litters. Wolves howled from the tree line, their voices braided with distant horns that rose and died behind the yawning breach at Eastwatch. Jon's breath came in clouds, each exhale a reminder that he yet lived while so many had fallen. He leaned against a frost-rimmed buttress, gripping Longclaw's pommel till his knuckles numbed. Across the yard, Samwell Tarly steadied Maester Aemon atop a pony blanketed with spare cloaks. Pipar looped reins through trembling fingers, face pinched white. Ed Tollett barked orders in a monotonous drone, his only defense against panic. But the wind stole half his words. The gate creaked open, and through it the first riders emerged. Tormund Giantsbane on a shaggy Goron, a child perched before his breast. The girl's dark eyes shone enormous beneath her fur hood, but she did not cry. She clutched a wooden doll scorched on one side, its painted smile half melted. Tormund's own grin had vanished. His beard was rimed with ice, and his gaze flicked constantly to the north as though expecting the darkness to come loping after him before he reached the trees. Jon forced himself upright and stepped into the flow, Ghost keeping pace. Each footfall felt like stepping onto glass. Exhaustion weighted his joints with molten lead. Yet duty pressed him forward. At the stables, grooms flung open stalls, slapping saddles onto shivering horses. Between their hoarse cries rose the snickers of terrified animals, nostrils flaring at the stench of blood borne on the wind. Jon zeitzed a black courser whose eyes rolled with panic. He whispered in its ear until the white ceased to show, then swung into the saddle. Castle Black must stand until the ravens fly, he told Dolorous Ed, who cinched the girth. Send word to every keep south of the neck. The wall is breached. The dead are coming. Ed saluted with 2 fingers, numbed blue. I always hoped to die of boredom. Seems the gods have better imaginations. He offered a tired smile. Go, Lord Commander. I'll see the birds off and keep the fire burning. Jon clasped his forearm, gratitude spoken without words, then wheeled the courser toward the main column, snaking down the King's Road. Above, the wall loomed like a white cliff slashed by a fresh wound, jagged, black, steaming where sorcery bled away. The breach swallowed starlight, a maw in reality. Even from this distance, Jon heard the creak of ice, the distant clamor of steel on stone, the groans of the freshly risen. He urged his mount to a trot, Ghost racing ahead in silent white blur. Behind them, Castle Black's gates groaned shut. Chains clanged. The battered garrison prepared to die, buying the realm a measure of time. They rode through night as snow thickened into a blizzard so dense the world narrowed to a tunnel of flickering torchlight and dark shapes. The column stretched nearly a mile. Free folk, Black Brothers, Southron sellswords hired by Stannis, a handful of wildling giants lumbering at the rear. Somewhere amid the press rode Stannis Baratheon himself, Lightbringer tied across his saddle, the blade's fiery heart dulled beneath a leather wrap to preserve night vision. Davos rode beside him, jaw clenched, one hand gripping the silver onion clasp at his throat as though to steady his thoughts. At dawn, they bivouacked in a hollow shielded by a low ridge of snow-drowned pines. Fires crackled under piled branches, their heat dampened by swirling flakes. Jon met with Stannis in a canvas command tent, lit by dim lanterns. Melisandre stood at the king's elbow, red hair glowing like embers against snow-spattered wool. The air inside was heavy with the scent of smoke and clove. A map weighed by daggers lay atop a trestle table, its waxed surface smeared with soot. "The breach lies here," Jon said, tapping Eastwatch's mark. "The Night King's fleet will skirt these capes, using rivers of ice as bridges. White Harbor is the first true port in their path. If it falls, the North will splinter." Stannis' blue eyes flicked over the map as though it were an enemy he might flay. "We march for Winterfell first. The Boltons still occupy the castle in my absence. I will not leave them unbroken to menace my rear." "Menator." Jon shook his head. "Every sword matters. The Boltons are men. They bleed. They fear. The dead feel neither. Let Roose Bolton stew in his hall for now. If White Harbor burns, there will be no south to march upon." Stannis' jaw clenched. "Are you king, or am I?" Jon met his glare. "You are king, but the dead do not kneel, your grace. They consume. We fight a war for every living soul, even for the Boltons." Silence stretched. Flickers of lantern light danced across Melisandre's ruby breast clasp. "The Lord of Light speaks through the flames," she murmured. "He shows me a city by the sea wreathed in blue fire. Corpses walk its streets. The water itself is frozen glass. I see men who wear merman sigils, nailed to their own gates. The king who ignores this vision dooms his crown." Stannis exhaled, white plume curling upward. "Very well. White Harbor." He jabbed a gauntleted finger at Davos. "Send riders to the Manderless. They stand for the crown. Let them prove it." Davos bowed. "At once, your grace." He met Jon's eyes on his way out, relief flickering through exhaustion. Hours later, the march resumed. Snowdrifts deepened until ponies sank to their bellies. Axes rang chopping branches to fashion crude sledges. Above, iron-gray sky rolled with slow menace, pregnant with fresh storm. Yet sometimes the clouds parted to reveal curtains of aurora, writhing like pale serpents. Each flare of eerie light silenced conversation, for it seemed a banner of the Night King itself, a proclamation writ across the heavens. Far to the south, in the crypt-cool halls of the Red Keep, Grand Maester Pycelle bent over a fresh raven scroll. Words trembled on the parchment like blood spatter. "The wall breached. Eastwatch fallen. Send aid. Jon Snow, Lord Commander." Pycelle's lips pursed. Arthritic fingers folded the message into his sleeve. The small council convened within the Tower of the Hand. Their voices soon rose to quarreling pitch. Queen Regent Cersei paced before the long oak table, silk skirts whispering. "Northmen crying wolf for the 1,000th time," she scoffed. "Snow this, winter that. My father called them grumblers who needed any excuse to beg southern coin." "Oh." Kevin Lannister, dour beneath silver hair, frowned. "The Raven says Eastwatch has fallen. Never in recorded history has the wall been breached." "Recorded by whom?" old men counting icicles. We have the Iron Bank's envoy arriving within 10 days. We cannot divert ships north chasing children's fables. Across the table, Lord Mace Tyrell juggled a quill between sausage-thick fingers. And Lord Commander Snow is stark bastard blood, he fretted. If this is some northern ruse to draw our strength up the neck, we could leave the capital exposed to young Griff's pretensions. Qyburn, robed in Maester Grey stripped of chains, offered a thin smile. Yet if the threat is real, ignoring it invites doom. Perhaps a measured answer. Dispatch a squadron of the Royal Fleet to White Harbor with observers. My little birds whispered that the Night's Watch numbers fewer than 600 men. They cannot conjure such tales from nothing. They cannot conjure such tales from nothing. Pycelle leaned on his staff, ribs rattling. The parchment bears the secret mark of a Lord Commander. A false raven would be discovered. But Cersei's glare silenced him. The council argued on, unaware of the chill creeping through corridors, of the drought in the hearths despite blazing logs. A draft from nowhere extinguished half the candles. Servants whispered of dreams filled with blue fire. Yet words in gilded chambers rang louder than warning bells. White Harbor's walls reared beside the calm sweep of the White Knife estuary, banners snapping in a salty breeze. The gray merman of House Manderley on a sea-green field. Fishwives hawked cod from baskets. Sailors haggled over berths, and on tidal flats children chased gulls, unaware the world's ending crept seaward. But in the Wolf's Den, a grim fortress atop chalk cliffs, Lord Wyman Manderley shifted uneasily upon his cushioned chair. His broad face, freshly shaved, had lost some jowl as though worry gnawed from within. Before him knelt Sir Marlon Locke, armor dappled with road grit. Ravens claim Eastwatch is ash, Locke said. My scouts rode north until snow blinded them. They swear the bay is frozen thick for leagues. They heard drums beneath the ice, or believed they did. Nanan. Wyman's thick fingers drummed the armrest. Drums. He laughed. But no mirth colored the sound. We all hear phantoms when wind howls across ice. Yet my dreams show a sea white as milk, ships dead silent gliding under no wind. His eyes, normally merry, were bloodshot. We must decide whether to bar our gates and pray or sally forth, and burn the bay before it freezes harder. Sir Marlon exhaled. To burn the bay we need pitch, wood, wildfire? Stores we do not keep. White Harbor was never built as sea fortress. We rely on tides, depth, loyal captains. He hesitated. If the enemy walks atop the water, our tides betray us. A door groaned. Maester Theomore entered, cheeks flushed, clutching a rolled parchment red-sealed with a burning heart. From King Stannis, my lord, he announced. As Wyman broke the wax, Theomore added, the king marches for White Harbor. He asks every sword to stand ready. The parchment rattled in Wyman's grasp. Stand ready, he echoed softly. God save us we will. On the shivering sea, dawn-limned jagged peaks of icebergs that drifted among the Night King's fleet like cathedral spires. Frost masked each hull in crystalline scales, and sails cracked when they billowed. The dead required neither rest nor food. They stood motionless on decks, frozen beacons. Among them glided other lieutenants, pale cloaks streaming. One knelt before the Night King at the prow of the great flagship, an offering, a sword of Valyrian steel dredged from the cabin of a whaler captured during the night. Frost climbed its black ripples, devouring the metal with hungry hiss. The Night King touched the hilt, and the once living fires within the blade sputtered to dark. Beneath the surface, among forests of seaweed turned to translucent glass, the drowned thralls pulled chains, guiding the fleet through channels too narrow for mortal seamanship. They moved with eerie precision, corpses brushing kelp that shattered into shards of ice as they passed. Schools of fish, stunned by sub-zero water, floated belly up in their wake, swirling behind like silver petals. At night the fleet's passage birthed an aurora of its own. Cold fire rising from masts, crackling arcs that leapt from spar to spar. Each flash echoed across the sky. Sometimes distant watchers mistook them for lightning, but no thunder followed. Only silence. Winterfell's gates groaned open to admit the first refugees. Crofters from Molestown, charcoal burners from the Gift, 24 brothers from the ruined Shadow Tower. They arrived gaunt, eyes ringed with sleepless dread. Sansa Stark oversaw their bedding in the great hall. Her voice calm, though her pulse thundered. Beside her towered Brienne of Tarth, sword ever within reach. Rickon's shaggy direwolf Shaggy Dog prowled the dais, hackles bristling. Every new face seemed to carry wind from the north, eddies of cold that made torches flicker blue. Evening brought a council in the solar. Stannis had yet to arrive, but northern lords who'd cast their lots with House Stark assembled. Lyanna Mormont small and fierce beside her towering guard. Robert Glover stooped under worry. Alice Karstark pale as morning frost, her newborn swaddled tight. Davos stood by the hearth recounting what messengers relayed of the fleet. Reports claim ice stretching south of Skagos, he said. Whalers swear they saw a ship move against the wind, sails like wings of bone. Murmurs rippled. Sansa looked to Bran, seated in a wheeled chair carved by Wintertown carpenters. His eyes, when not rolled white in vision, stared outward with unnerving calm. My dreams show rivers frozen in a single night, he said. I see wolves gathering in the Wolfswood, more than live in all the north. They wait for me. He blinked slowly. We must let them in. Glover frowned. Let wolves past our walls. Not wolves alone. Bran's voice softened. I mean to warg them, to command a pack large enough to harry flanks, scout forests. Our eyes will be theirs. Brienne crossed her arms. Even 1,000 wolves cannot halt an army of ice. No, Bran agreed. But they can buy ours, and ours may buy dragons. Heads turned to him, as if he'd spoken a spell. Davos cleared his throat. Dragons are far away in Slaver's Bay, or Ashes, depending on the tales. Queen Daenerys holds Meereen, not the north. Memnair. Bran closed his eyes, and when he spoke, it was with a certainty that chilled the marrow. The Dragon Queen has sailed. 3 worms upon the Dothraki Sea. I saw wings blacker than night, over towering spires of old Valyria. Fire moves as ice moves. They will meet. He opened his eyes. We must endure until then. Sansa exhaled, feeling the weight of history pressing upon her shoulders. We endure, she said. If Winterfell falls, the realm splinters. Every hearthfire south of the Neck must look to our beacon. Thustinawar. Down the King's Road, Joan's column neared the last river, swollen yet crusted with plate ice that thudded against the pilings of the crossing. Scouts reported tracks in the fresh snow. 3-toed prints as long as a man's shin bone, surrounded by hoof dents filled with frozen water. Giants. Jon sent Tormund to parley. At dusk they returned with 6 giants, their tusked faces streaked by tears frozen to crystals. They spoke in rumbling half-words of winds black as ruin, of cousins slain at Eastwatch, now marching south shackled by unseen chains. The giants wished for death in battle rather than slavery beyond death. Jon accepted their pledge. That night campfires dotted the riverbank, flames low and hooded. Jon walked a silent rows. Men whispered prayers in tongues strange and old. A free folk mother nursed a babe, though milk had dried. He felt their fear like a physical force pressing on the back of his skull. He found Sam in a healer's tent grinding willow bark. Maester Aemon lay feverish beneath furs, lips cracked. The cold steals his breath, Sam murmured. I don't know how to help. Jon knelt. The Maester's skin looked thin as parchment against bone. I'm failing you, old friend, Jon whispered. The blind eyes opened a sliver. You. Fight, Aemon rasped. Must burn. The ships. Burn? His hand trembled, seeking Jon's. Jon clasped it gently until sleep reclaimed him. Outside the wind changed, carrying a distant scent like metal struck by lightning. Jon knew the fleet had rounded the northern cape. At dawn, lookouts atop Skagos' jagged cliffs watched ice floes drift south past their coves, each raft littered with dead herring gulls. The water in coves froze solid in a single hour. By midday, the first masts pierced the haze, ghost gray sails, hulls white as bleached bone. Islanders rang iron bells long unused, but their calls vanished into mist. The dead made no haste toward Skagos. They sailed past, steering for deeper water and the mouth of the White Knife. Yet from each ship, drowned mariners leapt into the current, floating half-submerged beneath the ice crust. They drifted onto beaches, rose, and shambled inland. Skagos' lone watchtower burned through the night, its flames a brief spark swallowed by blue snow come morning. King's Landing stirred with rumor. Gold cloaks whispered of a new northern king crowned in Winterfell. Dockworkers claimed carrion birds fell dead on merchant ships from White Harbor. Septons dreamt of a crow wearing a crown of ice. In Flea Bottom, storytellers earned coppers describing pale giants that strolled through storms. But most small folk had endured too many wars to fear distant ghosts. They worried more over bread prices and the whims of lions. In the throne room, Cersei dismissed further discussion of the Wall. She ordered the royal fleet to remain in Blackwater Bay. "If monsters come," she declared, "let them batter against Storm's End first." Lord Baratheon always wanted glory, but Qyburn continued sending raven after raven north, seeking any scrap of information. He studied the cold candles each dawn, measuring how the wax hardened. One morning he found thin sheaths of rime on the marble windowsill. Far south where winter should whisper, not bite. He pried a sliver free, watched it vaporize in his palm. "Interesting," he murmured. The Night King's fleet glided up the White Knife beneath a sky peppered with wind-scoured stars. Riverbanks frosted solid, reeds bowed under ice. The flagship's keel split waters so cold it steamed. Behind marched lines of whites upon the newly formed crust, their footfalls a soft rhythm. Wolves shadowed them on the banks, some gaunt and gray, some spectral white. They paced without attacking, eyes glowing. High in the treetops crows gathered, blackening branches. At Clearwater Town, where fishermen mended nets and salted cod, fear blossomed too late. The first townsfolk saw only fog on the river, then hulls looming like cliffs. Sailors scrambled for oars, but the water hardened around their hulls, locking them in place. Frozen ladders of ice formed from deck to quay. A lone boy sounded the town's horn. By the third blare, corpses in fishermen wool tramped down cobbled lanes. They beat on doors with frost-hardened fists until hinges broke. Swords of cheap iron cut through them only to snap from the cold. By dawn, smoke spiraled from charred houses, but the fires failed to melt the river. The Night King watched from the prow as Clearwater fell in sighs and murmurs rather than screams, air too frigid for shrieking throats. Somewhere within that silence, a raven burst skyward, wings beating hard. It veered south. 2 nights later, Davos sighted those same black wings delivered to their camp outside White Harbor. Jon prized the scroll case from its leg, unrolled parchment stiff with frost. Clearwater Town gone. River frozen. Undead upon the march. He handed it to Stannis without a word. The king scanned, then turned to Melisandre, red hair alive in lantern glow. "Lightbringer?" he said. She drew the blade with ceremony, runes flaring orange across black steel. Its glow cast flickering warmth on men gathered round. Yet Jon noted the way flames guttered, as if starved by the night air. Inside White Harbor, Lord Wyman convened a war council in the Wolf's Den's old sept, its stone floor veined with damp. "We scuttle every ship we cannot crew," he declared. "Sink them across the mouth, deny the dead a landing." Ser Marlon objected. "Our harbor hands will mutiny if ordered to destroy livelihoods." Wyman slammed a fist. "What life if we allow monsters to birth at our quay? I will pay reparations twice over, assuming coin matters after the world freezes." He dismissed arguments. Orders rolled. Yet for every ship burned, 2 more remained afloat, captains unwilling to lose fortunes on rumor. They had seen no sails, felt no freeze, and salt air courage is stubborn. They mocked the snow-blind dispatches, until the harbor began to steam at midnight, a white fog creeping from water to streets. Fishwives woke to find wells iced solid. Black icicles hung from rigging though no rain fell. The river's tide ebbed sluggishly, thick as porridge. Bells tolled. Oarsmen ran to their decks to find anchors glued by rime. On the eastern horizon sails appeared, At first shadowy pennants, then full veils of bone. Panic cracked the city awake like whip cracks. Dockworkers hurled crates of wool at the ships, hoping to form barricades. Archers manned crenels on the fishgate arch, bowstrings snapping from cold before they loosed. Wyman lumbered atop the seawall just as the first arrow of ice crashed through a merlin, shearing stone as though cheese. The shard impaled a banner-bearer behind him, pinning man and merman flag alike to the battlement. A war horn of frozen note blasted from the lead ship. In answer, masts creaked, tipping forward. From their yards poured the dead, pale leviathan of corpses dropping into water that held them as if glass. They surged toward the quays. Some bore crude ladders of ice that grew as they walked, rungs forming beneath each step. Others carried no weapons, only their own limbs stiffened into bludgeons. Among them glided the other lieutenants, swords shimmering blue wildfire. Every step they took crusted the cobbles. White Harbor's defenders unleashed a volley of flaming arrows. The shafts hissed, embedded, flared, and died. Fire licked the dead, yet flesh refused to burn, moisture flash freezing around the flames. Oil casks tumbled from parapets, shattering into slick pools that congealed immediately, trapping boots, living boots, in sticky ice. Men struggled, fell, and the first wave of whites reached the fishgate beneath lantern glow. They pressed forward against the portcullis like a tide, bodies stacking until weight bent iron. Within minutes hinges shrieked, pins snapped. Iron teeth lifted as if by invisible lever. The dead streamed in. Inside the wolf's den, Wyman Manderley drew a broad longsword, knuckles whitening around its whalebone grip. He prayed to the seven, then to the old gods for good measure, his breath frosting. His throat felt raw from shouting, yet still he roared. Across the courtyard, Lady Willa Manderley, small and solemn, stood with a crossbow half her size. She fired bolt after bolt at shadows looming beyond smoke. Each bolt found a mark. Each mark rose again moments later. Her lips twisted in furious disbelief. Sir Marlon organized a cavalry charge down the Sailors' Square, heavy destriers armored in quilted blankets to keep lungs warm. They thundered over flagstones slick with half-frozen slush, lances leveled at a cluster of whites milling outside the Weeping Tower. Impact shattered bone, riders plunged on, but dead hands clutched fetlocks, pulling steeds screaming to the ground. Within seconds, horses thrashed beneath piles of corpses, then went still, rose again, eyes glowing. Knights were yanked from saddles, their helms caved by icy fists. One by one they joined the enemy ranks. On the harbor front, catapults groaned, flinging barrels of wildfire Davos had convinced Wyman to purchase from Lys months before. Green flame erupted on 3 enemy ships, devouring sails. Yet the Night King's lieutenant merely raised a hand. A wall of frost surged from river to mast, smothering the blaze while wood froze with a sound like shrieking wails. Flames faltered, died, entombed in sapphire ice. Davos, atop the rampart beside Wyman, muttered a prayer to the mother. He felt useless with only a dagger, but he stayed, signaling archers, steering desperate defense. Night deepened. Columns of the dead carved through streets like rivers seeking the heart. In Singer's Court, harpists who once serenaded nobles used their instruments as clubs before succumbing. In the new dock ward, whalers swung harpoons, tether lines whipping through snow, only to be dragged underfoot. Each block taken became another mustering yard for the Night King's advance. His flagship grounded upon the silt of the inner harbor without slowing. Ice flowed beneath its keel, lifting it to meet the seawall. He disembarked with languid grace, cloak whispering on frost. Where he stepped, stone whitened, cracked. Wyman saw him then, tall, crowned with horns of crystal, eyes fixed on the city's highest tower. Dread choked Wyman's throat. He motioned Davos to retreat, but already a hush spread. The Night King paused in the square of Merman's Mercy. He raised both arms slowly, and every flame within sight guttered. Silence fell like a blade. Then, in a motion fluid as moonlight, he lowered his hand. The corpses fallen within White Harbor's walls jerked upright. Archer, Knight, fishwife, sailor. Each rose, turned, and faced the living defenders. Some still clutched swords, others hefted limbs torn from comrades. They advanced. On the wall, Davos seized Wyman's sleeve. "We retreat to the den's catacombs. Seal the passages behind," he urged. But Wyman pulled free. "What? And leave the rest to die?" His breath steamed. He stepped onto the parapet and shouted, manderly to me, "Knights of the White Knife, hold!" A ragged cheer rose. Men rallied around their lord. They clashed with the newly risen. Steel on steel, ice on bone. For every blow they dealt, a frostbit fist struck two in return. Yet they did not break. The gatehouse shook with roars, human and otherwise. Above the melee, the Night King strode unchecked. Arrows struck his armor and shattered to diamond shards. A scorpion bolt whistled past his ear. He swiveled, caught it midair, snapped it. The wolf's den loomed before him, its massive doors barred. He placed a hand upon wood thick as castle walls. Frost bloomed, spread, and the great oak moaned. With a push, the doors fell like brittle wafers, clattering inward. He entered while snow drifted behind him like ghosts of roses. Inside the grand hall, tapestries of trident mermen fluttered. The Night King seemed to ignore them, his gaze fixed on a vaulted stair spiraling upward. He ascended. Each step he touched turned to glass. Behind him, a procession of other lieutenants followed. They reached the rooftop, where wind shrieked across crenellations. The Night King surveyed White Harbor aflame in frozen green wildfire smoke, mixing with snow. He lifted his sword. Far below, in the square of mermaids, Davos Seaworth saw the blade rise. Instinct shouted. "Down," he cried, hurling himself behind a toppled market cart. An instant later, a crack like mountain ice, splitting, echoed across the city. From the Night King's blade swept a wave of frost, a rolling wall of diamond dust that raced street to street. Stone froze, lanterns shattered. Men and women turned to statues mid-stride, captured expressions raw with defiance or terror. Davos felt the wave sweep overhead, cold enough to burn lungs, yet the overturned cart, soaked in wildfire spilt minutes earlier, flared bright green, forming a curtain of heat that blunted the spell. He tucked his nose into his cloak, prayed again, felt hair in his beard crackle with ice. When he dared peek, White Harbor was silent. Snow drifted among petrified forms. The Night King's fleet gleamed beneath starlight, masts coated in hoarfrost. Only pockets of fire still burned where wildfire pools kept air above freezing. The living survivors huddled in those islands, too numb to speak. Davos crawled to a low wall, coughing frost. He found Sir Marlon Locke collapsed, skin white, eyes flickering. Beyond him, Wyman Manderly knelt on one knee, sword buried in frozen cobbles, ice climbing his greave. The fat lord's breaths misted, shallow but steady. Davos slid beside him. "My lord, we must go." Wyman's eyes, bloodshot, fixed on the Night King's distant silhouette atop his tower. "He means to march inland," Wyman rasped. "Hell leave garrisons of death in every port." His lips quivered. "There is a vault under the Wolf's Den, oldest part of the city. Warm springs run there. Gather whomever breathes. We will hold till Stannis comes." Davos nodded. "Eh." He glanced at the statues littering the square. Men had dined with only yesterday. "We will hold." Before dawn broke, ravens streaked south and north alike. One reached Jones' camp, in a grove of scorched pine. He read its tale of White Harbor's fall beneath a lantern whose flame stood straight despite the windless night. Air so cold convection ceased. He lowered the parchment, eyes heavy. "They've taken the city," he told Sam. "Stannis rides to a ruin." He looked south. Clouds there glowed faintly, perhaps wildfire reflection, perhaps aurora. Jon ordered the march to double pace. Stannis rode ahead, Lightbringer unsheathed. The sword's glow guttering like a candle besieged by night. Melisandre urged King's men to sing hymns, voices cracking. Giants tromped mutely, each breath pluming like forges. Through trampled snow they pressed until dawn tinted the sky. No bird sang. When sunlight spilled, it revealed 100-foot pines bowed under ice. Even the deep rills of bark gleamed glassy. A hush hung, too deep for any world John had known. They crested a ridge overlooking the estuary. Where once the white knife shimmered beneath pale winter sun, they now saw a solid white expanse stretching to city walls half hidden under rime. Ships sat keel-locked at odd angles. Smoke curled in sluggish spirals, quickly freezing into brittle columns that toppled with faint clinks. No banners flew. No bells rang. A single horn note echoed. A tone John had last heard at Eastwatch. 3 blasts. Then silence. Stannis halted. "Prepare siege ladders and torches," he commanded, voice barely carrying. Knights exchanged uneasy glances. Siege ladders? Against frostborn shadows that walked through stone? Yet they obeyed. Davos galloped from the city, cloak streaming, face frost-burned. He reined beside John. "The port is lost," he said, voice raw. "The Night King holds the Wolf's Den. Survivors hide beneath it. The dead patrol every street." He coughed, blood on his glove. "If we charge straight, we'll be encircled. We need flame, sorcery, dragon glass." "Dragon glass we have little," John admitted. Sam found a chest at the fist. "Half gone now." He touched the hilt of Longclaw. "But Valyrian steel still cuts. We draw them out. Giants break streets. We collapse buildings. We corral them into kill zones. Now whence call?" Melisandre watched the city, red eyes shining. "I can weave a wall of flame, but only if Lightbringer feeds upon King's blood." She turned toward Stannis, but then her gaze shifted to a small figure further back. Shireen Baratheon, face scarred but bright beneath her hood, seated upon a pony. The girl greeted John with a wave. Melisandre's lips parted. John's own heart clenched. "No," Stannis said quietly. "Not my bloodline. Not again." He wheeled away, anger masking fear. Melisandre's face remained serene, but in her eyes guttered doubt. Deep in White Harbor's vault, Davos led Sansa Stark, who had arrived the previous night with a fast outrider, and Wyman passed steaming pools. Survivors huddled, hacking breaths. Bran lay on a litter nearby, eyes white, spirits soaring through ravens swirling overhead. Through his beaks he watched Stannis host array along the frozen river. He flew further, southward, seeking the dragon dreams. His mind skimmed above rolling waves far across the narrow sea. He saw black sails, red sails, and 3 dark shapes trailing smoke. Wings vast as castles. In each beating heart of fire Bran felt hope tempered by danger. The dragons came, but so did their riders' rivals, ships bearing scorpions of Korth and Volantis, cell sails ready to earn gold-killing legends. Bran tried to scream a warning through feathered throat, but only cause escaped. Back in the vault, Bran's body jerked. Sansa knelt beside him, brushing his clammy brow. "Show me," she whispered, as tears rimmed her lashes. But Bran's eyes saw only skies. Above, the Night King descended the tower staircase as dark yielded to gray dawn. He paused at a window slit, watching Stannis' forces marshal beyond the frozen flats. He sensed the heat of thousands of beating hearts. A banquet awaiting harvest. Yet he did not hurry. Patience was the pulse of ice. He extended his thought like a tendril of coal. Across streets, whites stirred as one, turning toward the gates. Giants of ice and bone lumbered from alleys, undead giants captured at Eastwatch, their heads crowned by jagged tusks of frozen marrow. Wolves with blue eyes padded silent between their legs. At the city gatehouse, a lone horn sounded twice. False call of the living sentinel Davos had set on watch. The dead answered with their own thrice blast. John stiffened. He saw their columns emerge. He signaled giants to spread into woods, men with dragon-glass-tipped spears to the fore. Stannis lifted Lightbringer. Its flame pulsed red, then guttered violet. The air turned brittle. Snowflakes drifted upward. John exhaled a prayer. Then the first bolt of wildfire hissed from a scorpion, shattering against the lead giant's chest. Green flared. The giant staggered, roaring silent rage. Yet frost consumed the flame in seconds, leaving only charred rib cage. It kept coming. John spurred his courser, Longclaw raised, Ghost beside him. The lines collided in crack of steel on ice. Men screamed, bones cracked, frost blossomed from severed limbs. The battle for White Harbor begun, and with it, the longest night the North had ever known, an hourglass of blood and ice whose sands would not cease to pour until either dawn burned the world clean or darkness swallowed every wisp of hope. Yak en. A hush like the breath before a storm fell across the icebound flats, as dusk slid its purple blade beneath a bank of bruised clouds. Wind died, yet the air itself seemed to shiver with an unseen pulse, heartbeat of the frozen river now serving as battlefield and tomb. Beyond the mangled wharves of White Harbor, Stannis Baratheon's host waited in grim silence behind a ragged hedge of shield and spear. Fires guttered within shielded braziers, but men crowded close only when sergeants barked. Fearful heat might reveal their silhouettes to archers of ice. Snow spiraled lazily, each flake glinting like powdered quartz in lantern light. Somewhere within that spiral, ravens circled overhead in widening gyres, eyes black as obsidian, watching as though tallying souls for the morrow. Jon Snow stood at the front where the frozen river widened into a rink of glass. Beneath the thin crust, dark current pulsed in slow, sluggish eddies. He tapped the surface with the toe of his boot. The crack was muffled, almost reluctant, and the water that welled instantly sheathed itself in new frost. Ghost prowled beside him, paws whisper quiet. Muzzle lifted toward the distant city's silent rampart. Within its frost-bitten streets, the candle glow of surviving hearths flickered behind hastily boarded shutters. Yet above those timid flames loomed a moving darkness. Columns of whites massing along alleys, the pale officers of the Night King pacing them like generals observing recruits. Jon heard the clank of reins as Sir Godry Faring urged his destrier forward. The tall knight reined in, stamping breath out white. Faring's visor hid most of what fear might contort, but his question rattled like loose mail. "Lord Commander, how long before they come?" Jon wiped sleet from his lashes. "They don't march by clocks. They move when he commands, and he commands when it best serves dread." He gestured with Longclaw toward the mists drifting off the harbor. "We have minutes or hours, no man can say. But they will come, and when they do, we stand in staggered files. The river will break beneath their weight. The current will drag hundreds under. Dragonglass spears at the ready when they claw back up. Burn every corpse that falls within reach." Faring's helm dipped. He spurred away to relay orders. Jon sheathed Longclaw, only long enough to cinch his cloak higher against his throat. All afternoon he had felt the faint tug, the half-dreamed sense that Bran's ravens perched in the trees behind him. Sight shared, watching through onyx pupils. It brought comfort and dread. If Bran watched, so too did the Night King see the swirling ravens overhead. And Noah Greenseer guided the living's hand. Battle of eyes as well as arms. Jon muttered a silent oath to whatever gods watched children who became doorways into forests of time. Out on the flank, Tormund Giantsbane strode among the pair of living giants. Mag the Younger and Boak One-Tusk, quietly explaining the plan once more. Giants needed little persuading to smash foes, but even they blinked warily at the iron cages set along the bank. Crude gabions packed with smoldering peat. When the signal flares rose, the giants would tip them, spreading burning pitch. Heat might buy moments before ice-covered flame, moments enough to separate dead formations. Tormund slapped Mag's bark-tough forearm, then turned to the line of free folk archers. Women from then and the Frostfangs. Boys barely higher than their yew bows. Their breath trembled, but their eyes shone with that fierce wild hunger for living another dawn. Behind them, Melisandre paced the snow, scarlet skirts hissing as though she walked upon glowing coals hidden beneath the drifts. She carried no lantern. The ruby at her throat pulsed faint crimson, bathing each exhale in blood-colored mist. She murmured prayers to R'hllor, or perhaps bargains. Jon could not hear the words, yet sensed each syllable tightening some unseen noose. He remembered the child she had eyed. Shireen remembered the horror once done at the wall when fire had devoured Mance Raider's stand-in. Tonight he would watch every move of hers. A horn blasted from within White Harbor, low and cavernous. John's pulse quickened. The cloud of ravens overhead convulsed, rearranging like runes scrawled by wind. From the sally ports cut into the seawall poured the enemy. Not a mad charge, but a silent, measured emergence. First the whites, hundreds wide as the gate, shambling in near lockstep. Ice crusting hair and sockets, then tall shapes gliding behind, pale armor shimmering with reflections of half-dead stars. Riders? No. Skeletal reindeer harnessed to sleighs heaped with fletched spears of ice, meant for hurling. Above them soared things like mantis wrought of crystal, wyvern skeletons reanimated, wings membraneless yet buoyed by some glacial updraft. For a breath the field froze in more ways than one. Living and dead staring across the gulf as though both recognized the turning hinge of destiny. Then came the signal, 3 arrows shot by Angie, flaming tips trailing sparks. They arced high, briefly vanished into the swirling dusk, then burst against the low clouds in blooms of orange glare. Giants bellowed. Men roared back. The cage fires were kicked over, peat rolling across the slick river's skin, igniting channels of flame. Steam billowed, obscuring lines, and in that murk, John heard Tormund's horn return the challenge. At once arrows streaked from free folk bows. Each had a shard of dragonglass bound with sinew. They hammered into the vanguard, shattering skulls, chopping spines. Each struck white, collapsed, and did not rise. But the wave behind climbed over them, feet finding purchase upon the fallen, as though clambering a scree slope. Sir Godrey's heavy cavalry thundered forward, 30 in lamellar and heavy cloth meant to blunt the cold's bite. Hooves pounded a path packed by sappers hours before. Banks of ice berm piled high to guide the dead into kill lanes once the knights wheeled back. John watched them lower lances, sunlight glimmering on steel points leafed with obsidian. The first impact scattered whites like ninepins. Horses screamed as hands clawed fetlocks. Riders slashed downward with longswords already rhymed white. But for every corpse felled 2 new clambered. Within moments the knights were bogged, fighting in circles. John cursed and signaled. 2 horn blasts. Archers shifted angle, flaming arrows hissing downward. Knight and steed were silhouettes trapped in dust of ice and sparks of pitch. Bran's ravens plunged low then, swirling into the advancing horde. John felt, rather than saw, what Bran meant them to do. Break line of sight, distract the pale lieutenants directing the surge. Black wings battered blue-lit visages. Talons pecked at glowing slits that served as pupils. For a heartbeat the command faltered. Dead ranks stuttered. John sights the bolt of chance, drew Longclaw, sprinted ahead with Ghost racing like a white thunderbolt. Behind him Stannis' infantry surged as rehearsed. 4 shield wall wedges tipped with Valyrian blades. Jon, Stannis, Sir Justin Massey, and Alice Karstark, who refused the rearguard and strode in mail with her child's name carved on her sword's fuller. Steel met ice. Longclaw parted a white's neck. Blackened goo hissed where it splashed frozen turf. Jon pivoted, took a knee as Ghost leapt over him. Fangs closing on a gauntlet, still gripping an axe. Together they advanced, foot by bloody foot, stacking fallen dead to keep them underfoot, never letting arms slip free to clutch ankles. Each kill exacted a toll. Lungs seared by cold sharper than any forge. Forearms trembling from endless parry. Yet momentum built, until the first of the others stepped into their path. He was tall as Tormund, gaunt yet regal, crown of spinal shards wreathing white hair. His sword radiated chill so fierce frost smoked from its edge, though the very air was sub-zero. Jon met blade to blade. Longclaw rang, metal groaning where enchantment collided with antithesis. For 3 strokes, Jon matched him. On the 4th, the other's strength nearly staggered him. Yet Stannis' orange blade streaked over Yon's shoulder to cut low. The flaming sword met Froststeel with a hiss. Orange fire guttered, nearly snuffed. Jon thrust, while the other's parry lagged. Valyrian steel punched between crystal ribs. Light burst. The thing shattered, fragments tinkling. But fragments did not melt. They twitched, swirling around the wound like ice moths. They sought shape, knitting back ribs. Jon swallowed dread. Aelys Karstark's shriek cut his trance. Another lieutenant bore down on her wedge. Jon smashed a frozen shard with his hilt, severing the attempt at reconstitution. Then charged to her side. Above them, a wyvern skeleton swooped, ribs laced with icy sinew. It spat a plume of powdered shards, razoring flesh. Men screamed, clutching eyes. Jon ducked under the spray, realizing the undead dragon's breath was not flame, but air so frigid it cut like knives. Giants answered. One tusk hurled a boulder the size of a cottage hearth. It smashed the winged corpse, splintering bones. Shards rained down, impaling wights and living alike. The giant roared in triumph, then roared in agony as 3 spears of frost lanced his thigh. He tore them free, tossing dead horsemen like dolls, but dark liquid oozed, freezing in clots. Still he fought, slower now. At the center of the frozen flats, Melisandre strode, arms upraised. Fire sprinted from her fingertips across the snow in lines like cracks in burning parchment. The flame reached Pete Slicks and leapt skyward, forming a ring of livid red around the living host's rear. Wights that tried to flank met walls of heat. Many fell, convulsing, as flames licked old sinew. Yet Melisandre faltered suddenly, knees buckling. The ruby at her throat dimmed. She gasped, clutching ribs. The wall of fire flickered. Far across the river, the Night King had emerged from the Wolf's Den gate. His sword raised, eyes fixed on the priestess as if plucking threads of her magic one by one. Jon saw the flame gut her and felt cold surge round his ankles like a tide. He looked to Stannis, saw fear flicker behind the king's iron discipline. Jon slashed another wight, then sprinted toward Melisandre. He tore a burning brand from the ground and thrust it at her failing ring, reigniting one break. But more breaks formed. Each time the Night King lowered his hand. A lick of red snuffed, replaced by blue ice skirling across ash. Suddenly, from the south woods, a distant horn answered. 2 short blasts, a long, high keening. Jon's head snapped. Out of the tree line poured a pack of shapes, giant shadows dipping low and leaping high between trunks. Direwolves, more than Jon had ever known existed. Wolves of the Wolfswood. Gray, black, white, mottled, answering Bran's call. At their center loped Shaggy Dog, shaggy coat frost-rimmed. Beside him padded a she-wolf the size of a warhorse. Lyanna, Ghost's wild kin said to rule the forest for 100 moons. Bran warged their eyes, guiding them to latch onto the dead's flanks. They fell upon the horde with primal fury, jaws splintering armor of ice. Where they shredded, blue fire leaked like poison mist. Yet they did not falter, for Bran's will kept pain distant. The Night King turned at the chaos blooming on his left. His gaze flickered, and a sheet of rime shot across the field toward the wolves. Jonathan leapt between, swinging long-clawed idol. Steel carved the sheet, sparks of frost raining. Shaggy Dog barreled through the gap, tossed a white into the air. Ghost joined, white blur carving a tunnel for the pack. Hope kindled, briefly. From the harbor's masts echoed a horn even more monstrous than before, a note like glaciers colliding. The river's surface convulsed. Up from below burst shapes drowned yet animate. Harbor seals, walrus calves, a whale calf half-rotted, each festooned with ice chains, jaws snapping. They surged onto the ice flats, dragging water that froze mid-splash, locking hooves and greaves in crystal. The living lion began to buckle under weight and terror. Jon fought beside Stannis to stabilize the right wing. "We must reach him," Jon shouted, breath fogging. "Cut off the head." Stannis nodded curt, pivoted Lightbringer to rally knights. But the Night King now advanced, each step conjuring spurs of ice that vaulted him forward like stilts. He closed distance with inhuman grace, frost swirling, sword poised in 2 hands. As Jon readied to meet him, Melisandre's scream tore sky. Jon glimpsed her on her knees, hair whipping as though caught in wildfire's backdraft. A swirl of blue cinders lifted from her form. Her life heat siphoned to feed some spell. She reached towards Stannis. "King's blood," she croaked. "I cannot hold him." Stannis strode, pulled the leather glove from his own hand, and drew a dagger across palm without breaking stride. Blood spilled red onto the snow. It steamed. He flung drops at Melisandre. They sizzled where they landed, ruby rekindling bright as dawn. She gasped, rose, flames in her eyes. Suddenly the ring fire blazed anew, a towering pyre that thrust back the Whites' pressing flank. Jon felt scorching heat on his face. For a moment, stalemate. But the Night King thrust his blade into the ice. A spiderweb of cracks radiated. The river groaned, huge bubbles of air racing beneath. Jon's heart stuttered. He recognized the trap. They fought on a shell of ice. Now it would break. "Back!" he roared, signaling horns. Drivers lashed horses already frothing. Giants lumbered, clutching broken siege beams. But they were too deep now. A thunderous roar, like the earth retching, split the flats. Ice gave way in tongues, water hurling shards like spears. Men plunged, screaming. Cold hit lungs like knives. Jon flung himself toward a widening fissure, caught a root of ice, hauled body out. Ghost scrambled beside, shaking water from coat, forming frost instantly. Stannis stood on an island of sliding ice barely 4 spear lengths across, 40 living souls around him. Night King stood on another, slightly nearer shore. Between them churned black water, bobbing corpses. It seemed the enemy lord wished Stannis isolated for personal reckoning. Jon shouted, but wind and gale drowned. He scanned for allies, found her further right, rallying a knot of Karstark pikemen afloat on a floe. She pointed north, eyes wide. Jon followed gesture. Beyond shattered flats lay the anchored remains of the Night King's fleet. Masts now glowed a sickly indigo. A low hum vibrated air. Lines of the drowned pulled at capstans. Jon realized with horror they were drawing ships through the channel into the estuary, turning them into battering rams of ice. If the hulls reached the shore where survivors clustered against the tree line, momentum would shatter them like eggs. Civilians, wounded, horses, all crushed or drowned. He looked back at Stannis, then at the danger bearing on the defenseless. Choice like a knife. He made it. "Torment," he called. The wildling bled from a cut-over eye but grinned viciously. "We swim," Jon said. Torment barked a laugh. "Snow. I knew you'd freeze my balls eventually." They lashed ropes to dragonglass spears, tied ends to their waists. Ghost whined but leapt first, white fur streaking across half-submerged blocks. Jon followed, plunging waist-deep, cold like molten tin. He forced legs to move. Others joined, free folk, black brothers, even 2 giants who slogged deeper, water to their chests. The first undead ship loomed, prow carved into snarling kelp dragon. Its hull scraped along ice scree, unstoppable. Jon and Tormund reached a broken mast, bobbing near the bow, hoisted themselves. Drowned Whites clambered over gunwales, water gushing from mouths. Jon carved necks, severed anchor lines. Above, a skeletal mariner brandished a glaive of rib bone. Tormund split its skull with axe. They hacked ropes, letting sails billow. Wind caught cracked canvas, pushed vessels sideways against current. The ship wedged in flow, slowing. The second hull rammed its stern chain of ice. But giants were there. Mag the Younger waded hip-deep, jammed his shoulder against hull, bellowed effort. With creak like splitting continents, ship rolled, capsized. Frozen timbers shattered. Water erupted, pulling Whites into eddy. Jon surfaced, gasping, clung to floating beam. Breaths came ragged ice. Yet the rams were delayed. Civilians had time to scramble upland. He turned, searching for Stannis. The King's flow drifted nearer Inner Harbor, where stone wharves jutted like broken teeth. Stannis still stood, blade aflame though guttering. Around him, Half his company froze, limbs blackening. The Night King stepped across stepping stones of ice he conjured curve by curve, closing the gap. Behind Stannis, Melisandre knelt, chanting desperate incantations, but her ruby sputtered again each time the enemy Lord Silent Will brushed her. Jon felt something shift overhead. He looked skyward. Clouds scudded aside, revealing a gibbous moon, and the ravens parted, revealing a shape on the horizon. A glow, red-orange, pulsing like a forge at sea. Not wildfire. Fire of dragons. Their distant roars rolled like thunder across tundra. Bran's vision realized. Dragons had crossed the narrow sea. Daenerys Targaryen was coming. The Night King turned his head slightly, as if hearing same thunder. A whisper ran through the undead. He understood the threat. He must act before fire reached field. He raised his arm. Frost spiraled upward. A vortex-forming spear of perfect crystal, as tall as a tower. He hurled it not at the dragons, still beyond range, but at Stannis. The spear ripped wind in shriek audible miles. Stannis braced, Lightbringer raised. But mortal arms cannot parry sky-forged lances. Jon shouted, a cry lost in gale. Then, a blur. A direwolf. No, shaggy dog. Black bolt, leaping. The wolf smashed Stannis aside as spear struck. It tore through Shaggy Dog's chest, detonating in a burst of shards. Wolf's howl faded to whimper, body sliding to water-glass surface. Stannis stumbled, stunned, but alive. He rose, blood on brow. He stared at the dying direwolf, eyes clouds of grief and shock. The Night King's face betrayed no emotion. He stepped onto Stannis' flow. Stannis met him. Lightbringer clashed against Frostblade. Spark and vapor. Fatigue gnawed Stannis' muscles. Frost crept along hilt. Jon, still afloat on beam, swam. Each stroke agony. Ghost, nearby on a slab, caught Jon's sleeve in jaws, helped drag him. Stannis summoned final strength. He thrust low, severed the Night King's thigh. The wound expelled no blood, only flurries of snow. The leg reformed mid-arctudi. The Night King reversed grip, plunged blade into Stannis' stomach. Ice spread from wound like cracks in pond. Light faded from Lightbringer, the flame sucked into fissures. Stannis gasped, but even gasp froze, shimmering. Melisandre screamed, as though her heart were shattering. She seized the king's wrist with both hands, chanting. Her ruby exploded, shards embedding in her flesh. Fire funneled down her arms into Stannis' veins. His eyes blazed, chest flaring red beneath mail. Ice retreated an inch. He drove his blade upward into the Night King's shoulder. For first time, the ancient lord recoiled. His sword's edge flickered, blue aura sputtering. Melisandre poured more fire. Her hair burned, skin blistering, until Stannis' wound glowed red-hot and ice hissed. Jon hauled onto the flow's far edge. He rose, vision tunneling. Ghost bounded past, teeth bared at the Night King. But an invisible blast of cold hurled the wolf away. Jon advanced, dragging Longclaw, boots slipping on blood-slick ice. Behind him Tormund clamored, howling challenge. The Night King ripped Lightbringer from his chest, flame still licking, and tossed the sword aside. Melisandre collapsed, face ash-white, ruby shards, dull. Stannis knelt, clutching torso, gasping steam. Jon reached them as the Night King whirled, sword scything. Jon intercepted, sparks erupting. Pain ricocheted through arm. He pivoted, slashed thigh, deflected riposte. The Night King moved like flowing water, every strike measured to millimeter of killing precision. Each parry drained Jon, yet he held. Tormund joined, swinging giant forged axe. The Night King ducked, blade slicing Tormund's forearm to bone. Blood sprayed, instantly freezing into ruby stalactites that shattered as they hit ice. Tormund laughed, a raw broken laugh, swung again with left hand. Jon saw opening. Fracture in Night King's pauldron from earlier strike. He thrust Longclaw there while Tormund drew attention high. Blade punched crystal. For an instant, nothing happened. Then fissures spidered from wound, webbing across the Night King's torso. He staggered, eyes flashing bright blue to blinding white. Yet he did not shatter. Instead, he seized Longclaw's blade in bare hand. Frost crawled onto Valyrian steel, black ripples whitening dark. Jon tugged, stuck. Night King yanked, hurled Jon across flow. Jon slid, ribs cracking against rim, nearly tumbling into river. The ancient lord tore Longclaw free, regarded it like a curio from lost age. He snapped it across his knee. Steel shrieked but refused to break. He tossed sword aside and advanced on Jon, who groped for any weapon. His hand closed around Melisandre's fallen ruby shards. Heat seared skin. He yelped, but did not release. Tiny flames danced along his fingertips where blood blistered. Night King loomed, sword poised for death blow. Jon, half kneeling, hurled handful of glowing shards straight into glowing eyes. Ruby slivers struck cheek, brow, necktie. Where each implanted, the blue light warped, flames seared. The Night King recoiled, free hand clawing at face. Steam roiled. Blue aura flickered. Jon lunged, tackling him. They crashed, sliding to edge. Below, the river churned with drowned whites. Jon wrapped arms around Night King's torso, using weight not strength, and heaved himself an enemy over lip into black water. Cold annihilated breath. Silence roared in ears. Icy darkness engulfed them. Night King's eyes blazed under the surface. Shards still embedded. Each glow fighting crimson. Jon's lungs spasmed. He kicked downward deeper, dragging ancient evil with him. Water collapsed. Pressure, cold. Night King raked Jon's back. Armor plates splintered. Jon's vision dimmed. Yet in depths, ruby shards brightened. Flames swirling. Water around them began to boil, a pocket of superheated swirl. The last of Melisandre's life magic. Jon released hold, kicked upward, bursting through ice film as lungs screamed. He gasped ragged air. Ghosts snarled, dragging him onto shattered board. Below, a column of bubbles erupted, then a shockwave cracked sheets for yards. Night King burst through, but something changed. Shards burned hotter, his armor sloughing molten ice. He roared, a sound like glaciers grinding, but cracks spread across his frame. His sword dissolved into snow. He reached for Jon, but arms crumbled to sleet. With final glare of ruined white eyes, the Night King imploded, body exploding into cloud of snow so fine it glittered like stardust before dissipating across river. Silence followed, deep and stunned. On shore and ice floes the whites stuttered, movements jerking. Some collapsed as threads cut. Others froze mid-step. Binding gag. The pale officers still standing looked skyward as though seeking orders, then shrieked. Glass voices fracturing. They turned, running north in disarray. Whites followed, staggering retreat. Giants of ice toppled, inert. Whales died on wind. Jon lay panting, chest convulsing. Torment reached him, binding torn mail, laughter half-crazed. Snow, you slippery bastard, you killed winter itself. Jon shook head. Not killed. Maybe broken. He looked at ruby shards fused to Night King's armor flakes floating nearby. Cool now, lifeless. He wondered what force had truly undone ancient evil. The fire of a king's blood, the sacrifice of a wolf, the courage of 1,000 hearts, or twists of fate older still. Stannis crawled to the edge, clutching wound. Melisandre lay motionless, skin cracked like porcelain, but eyes watched Jon, filled with exhausted relief and unshed tears. She whispered, "Hey," was one, but not the only. Words faded. Above, the first dragon roar rolled across sky, nearer now. Embers flicked along clouds. Jon, bleeding, frost-scorched, pushed to knees, face lifted to looming shapes. Drogon black and bronze, Rhaegal green and gold, Viserion pale cream. They soared over harbor, banking wide. On Drogon's back stood a woman of silver hair, face set in grim determination. She looked upon shattered dead and burning city. then down at the man dripping river water beside a dead god's remnants. Their eyes met across distance and history, two tides converging. Behind John, men and women, free folk, black brothers, Karstarks, Manderleys newly freed, raised weapons, exhausted cheers weak yet fierce. Fires still burned, ice still cracked, but dawn's first light gilded every blade and banner with gold. Somewhere Bran's ravens landed quietly upon rampart, wings folding. The boy inside the trees of time smiled faintly, though sorrow weighed his heart for Shaggy Dog and those lost. Yet hope, fragile and precious, had rooted. John stood weaving on numb legs, ghost at heel. He watched Daenerys' dragons tilt wings, descending toward flat farmland beyond city. What alliances forged now could decide whether the Night King's defeat became dawn, or only a pause before deeper darkness. He looked north, where ice plains stretched to walls shattered breach. Beyond, winds still howled. The army undead broken but not erased. The magic animating corpses waned yet might flare anew if another rose to claim Cobalt crown. Battle over, or not. John sheathed the longclaw, blade now marred by frost, edge nicked by eldritch cold. He touched shards embedded in palm, each sting reminder of flame given for life bought. Around him, wounded groaned. Friends embraced, wolves licked blood from muzzles. Stannis was borne to sled, Melisandre carried upon litter, ruby shard still faintly ember within chest. White Harbor lay half ruin, half refuge, its streets steam and ice. Yet survivors emerged from vaults, eyes wide at dragons wheeling overhead like heralds of a legend newly born. Children gazed unafraid, perhaps sensing that living fire had come to balance death's chill. Water in harbor began to thaw, sheets cracking. Dead ships drifted aimless. John pressed Tormund's hand, then limped toward quay where planks cracked under frost. He pictured Sam, Bran, Sansa, each thread converging. He inhaled air smelling of smoke and salt and newborn spring. He exhaled, saw breath swirl upward, not as white plume but ordinary mist, untouched by cruel sorcery. Dawn streaked pink across sky, dragons silhouetted. Hope, a single fragile word, tasted warm on tongue despite the cold river still clinging to his clothes. Behind him, a distant boom shook earth, ice shelf calving far up the white knife. Echoes rolled south like muted thunder. John did not turn. Let the echoes remind the world how close oblivion had come. Let them remember that walls of ice and thrones of swords mattered less than warmth, shared beside meager flame. He walked, shoulders straightening with every step, toward future uncertain yet reclaimed, one heartbeat at a time.